Welcome to Deepwoken at Home. Pilgrimmed. Today I decided to finally take a look at Pilgrimmed, a game that has been widely requested across this channel. As usual with these sort of game requests, I'm never entirely sure why people recommend me games. Sometimes they tell me directly. Sometimes I get messages where it's like, this game is the best game ever, please play it. And sometimes it's, this game sucks, please play it. But I can never actually tell why people have recommended this game specifically. That being said, I can say right off the bat, is Pilgrimmed a bad game? No. Is Pilgrimmed a good game? That one's hard. Is it better than most Roblox games? Yes, but that's not a very high bar. So, should you play it? Maybe. It really depends. But probably the biggest question, is this a Deepwoken clone? No, not quite. Despite having relatively similar gameplay, I can't in good faith say this is a Deepwoken clone. So despite the joke at the front of the video, I'm gonna try my best to not compare the game to Deepwoken as much as possible, because it's just too different. That being said, it is close enough that I can say that if you have access to Deepwoken, I would play that rather than this literally any day of the week. That is just a superior game regardless of whether or not this is a clone or not. Anyways, there are a fair amount of things that Pilgrimmed did right, so I want to start off with talking about the positives of the game. The first pretty major positive is the tutorial. The tutorial for Pilgrimmed is basically perfect. It teaches you just about everything that you would ever need to know in the game, and there was no point while I was playing that I felt like I absolutely had to go off-platform in order to figure out how to play the game. And that is something that cannot be understated how important it is. Now, were there plenty of things that I'm sure I missed because I didn't go off-platform, and is it a wiki game at heart? Almost certainly. But at face value, if you're just a player looking to jump in and play the game, you can do that without getting stomped into the floor because you don't understand anything because you didn't use a wiki. Segueing further, I also think that the clothing and equipment system is really solid here, and it actually had a lot of things that I've talked about in my Deepwoken videos that I wish they did more of over there. Really what it comes down to is the equipment that you, equip actually matters and makes meaningful impact on your character. This is helped by the fact that most equipment is predominantly the same, aside from some modifiers that you can roll on the equipment, which you can also re-roll, that might change the stats a little bit. But the actual stat rolls that are directly attached to the equipment is always something interesting. Like, for example, there was one thing where it made it so the final hit of my M1 combo lit people on fire. Then there was an outfit that I could have bought that would make the final hit of my M1s with a specific fighting style do more damage, and it was a 50% increase, which is very sizable. At the end of the day, all of the things that you could equip looked like they would directly make a difference to your playstyle, which means it was a difficult choice picking between one or the other. And that's something that I just think is really fun and enjoyable to have in a game. In terms of general information, I already talked about the tutorial, but another thing that's fantastic is the Beastiary. This shows you all of the enemies you fought, as well as the things that they can drop and their drop rates, which is one of those things that you really don't need to put in your game, but just having it here is extremely appreciated. Knowing what the enemy is going to drop, and most importantly, knowing how often it may drop, is a super cool feature to have in the game, so I don't have to go off-platform in order to find it. More games really ought to have something like this. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of things that I enjoyed in the game was the way that the skill tree worked. And it's not that it's directly better than other games, but I just thought it was an interesting take, and I was a fan of it here. When you go to the skill tree, I initially thought it works like most other skill trees, where in order to get the thing above where you started, you need to get the node below it. But in this game, that's not how it works at all. All you need to do to acquire a specific skill in the skill tree is have the skill points available, which means that if you want to mix and match between all of the different skill trees, that's an option without having to heavily invest, which I thought was a really cool feature and I'm just a fan of in general. Now, all of those positive things being said, there were still a mountain of problems that I had with this game. And hands down, the biggest one is 1000% the game's combat. To put it bluntly, the combat is just sort of bad. It feels like they were attempting to mimic Deepwoken, but didn't understand a lot of the things that made Deepwoken's combat interesting or fun, and so we just ended up with this very strange hybrid system of either cheesing or stat checking, and very, very little in between. I'll try to explain all of the problems with the combat in no specific order. First of all, multi-enemy ganking fights are borderline a lost cause, and that's mostly stemming from the lack of auto parry frames after you parry an attack. The way that Deepwoken attempted to avoid ganking being, well, extremely unfair is they made it so after you parry an attack, if someone else tries to hit you within a certain frame, it will automatically parry the next attack. So if two people try to hit you, you parry the first one and then attack, and the second person tries to hit you, you'll automatically parry the second one. In Pilgrimmed, this is not the case, which means that if you try to parry an attack from one enemy and the enemies stagger out their attacks, you're just going to get hit. Effectively, what this means is if you're in a 2v1 or 3v1 scenario, you can't just directly fight your enemy head on. It's basically not an option. That ends up leading you to running away, getting one hit, running away, getting one hit, running away, getting one hit, and this is just not fun. Like, I'm sorry, this is not enjoyable gameplay. Kiting enemies around is not fun. Actually fighting them is fun, but you don't do that in this game. Another reason why you don't do that in this game is because there is a complete and total lack of a block buffer. I talk about this all the time in so many different game reviews and game impressions, but with this game, if you attack and then hold block, it will not buffer your block on the fastest frame. This means that you need to perfectly time your block with when the end lag of your M1 ends, something that isn't reasonable to expect from players all the time and also feels terrible from a gameplay perspective. So again, if you go to attack an enemy and you attack them 3 times and then go to block and you mistime it because you weren't perfect, then you take damage, and that sucks. So this leads you to either number 1, go for far less hits because the enemy might attack you, or, well, what actually happens, run away, one hit, run away, one hit, run away, one hit. It's not fun. And of course, it gets even further exacerbated by the fact that the enemy's sound design is either borderline non-existent or just terrible at best. So for some ungodly reason, the attacks in this game just don't have a startup sound. I don't think any of them do. Like, legit, the only attacks in the game that have a startup sound are the heavy attacks, and everything else has no startup. That means you're relying directly on the visuals, and an enemy has several different attacks. So the visuals could mean anything. Whether it's an unblockable, whether it's a parryable attack, you have to memorize all of the visuals. You can't rely on any sort of audio. And this becomes a real problem when you start factoring in spells. The most egregious example was definitely the Ice Assassin, which was the least fun enemy to fight in the entire game, by a massive margin. That's because trying to fight this guy head on is pretty much a lost cause, because no matter how many times you hit him, he's going to armor through half of your attacks. And after armoring through your attacks, he's going to use this 3 ice pillar move. There's no sound effect for the move, and the move comes out unreasonably quickly. It comes out so fast that I don't even know if you're able to parry the attack, because I was never able to successfully do it. I was curious on exactly how fast, so I went frame by frame, and it seems like this attack comes out on about frame 9. At 60 frames per second, this is 150 milliseconds. Now, funnily enough, 150 milliseconds is tied for some of the fastest human reaction time on the planet. Why they would program a move in that's faster than the fastest or on par with the fastest human reaction time on the fucking planet, I don't have a goddamn clue. What the fuck were they thinking? So when you consider all these factors, what does it lead to? Runaway hit, runaway hit, runaway hit. That sucks. So this is where we get to the weird part when it comes to combat, because when I got further in and when I brute forced my way through getting the Rock Kwon Do or whatever the hell, which is kind of funny, but regardless, when I brute forced my way through that, it put me in a position where I could pretty much stat check all of the enemies in the game, and that feels like the combat that they were almost going for. The game feels better when you're just stat checking people because the skilled way to play the game is basically written out of the game because of how wonky the combat is. It almost feels like mixed messaging. Did they want to make a game like Blox Fruit where you just get the best build and steamroll everything? Or did they want a more skill-based game like Deepwoken? I have no idea. I don't know what they were going for, but I know if they were going for the Deepwoken approach, they failed miserably. And if they were going for the Blox Fruit approach, well, I can't say if they succeeded because I don't play those games because they're terrible. Regardless, I can't talk about combat all day, so we're gonna move on to talking about the environment. The environment is far from the worst that I've played in a game, that's for sure. That being said, it's nowhere near the best. The environments that you traverse through, for the most part, don't feel like completely empty wastelands. That being said, some of them do feel like completely empty wastelands, and I do feel like the map could have been condensed a little bit. A lot of NPCs that I ran into basically just didn't have anything worthwhile to say, which was kind of weird, and the ones that did have something worthwhile to say would often assign me to do something, which is good. But while I was wandering through a lot of these empty fields, sometimes dotted with enemies, I couldn't see anything. Because the biggest problem with the environments in this game is absolutely without a doubt the fog. The amount of things that induce fog and make it so you can't see is staggering. I think I can comfortably say that for maybe 80% of my gameplay, I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. That's not good. I don't know why they decided to go this fog route. Maybe they didn't want people to see the rest of the world because it's an empty wasteland, but a fogged out empty wasteland is no better than a standard empty wasteland, I can assure you. Now, overall, my gameplay eventually concluded when I got access to this little desert shack. I don't know what's past here, and I didn't really feel any need to continue playing. I played for about 3.5 hours, and felt like I could make a good judgment with that amount of time played. Like I said, Pilgrimmed is not a horrifically terrible game, and I'm not coming on here to just totally put it down. That being said, I cannot see myself ever logging into this game again. It doesn't fill any sort of niche that Deepwoken doesn't already, and there's nothing so interesting about it that would make me ever want to log in again. It's a halfway decent game. If you don't have access to the better games in the genre, you can give it a shot, but other than that, not really worth your time. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Pilgrimmed is a masterpiece? Is that why I got so many comments about it? I've got no idea. But please, if you're going to do that, actually let me know why rather than just flaming me. Otherwise, it's not very helpful. With that, I am wrapping up. So if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.